When a wealthy student mocked the janitor for touching her piano, no one expected the humble cleaner to reveal a breathtaking secret that would leave the entire academy speechless. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The grand hall of Westridge Academy gleamed with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A magnificent grand piano sat center stage, its ebony surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Students in expensive uniforms milled about, chatting and laughing, their voices echoing in the cavernous space. Charlotte Winters, impeccably dressed in the academy uniform with designer accessories, sat surrounded by her entourage of equally privileged friends. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped impatiently on her phone as she tossed her long blonde hair over her shoulder. At 17, she was already the star pupil of Westridge's prestigious music program, a fact she never let anyone forget. This recital is going to determine whether Juilliard even looks at my application. Charlotte sighed dramatically, checking her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. If Professor Harmon doesn't arrive soon to help me practice, I'm going to scream. Madison, Charlotte's loyal sidekick, nodded sympathetically. Your solo is already perfect, Char. Everyone knows you're getting into Juilliard. The rest of these amateurs don't stand a chance. Charlotte smiled, basking in the affirmation. Still, I need to practice. This piece requires absolute precision. She stood up, smoothing her skirt as she walked toward the grand piano. I suppose I could run through it once while we wait. Just as Charlotte approached the piano, an older man in a gray janitor's uniform emerged from a side door, pushing a cleaning cart. Robert Jenkins, 58, had been the head custodian at Westridge Academy for over 15 years. His weathered face bore the lines of a hard life, but his eyes remained kind and attentive as he quietly went about his work, trying to remain invisible to the students. Charlotte frowned as she watched Mr. Jenkins begin to dust around the grand piano. "Excuse me," she called out sharply. "I need to practice. Can't you do that later?" Mr. Jenkins nodded apologetically. "Of course, Miss Winters. I'll just finish this corner and be out of your way." As he reached across to dust the piano's lid, his hand accidentally brushed against the keys, producing a soft, discordant sound. Charlotte gasped as though he had committed a cardinal sin. "Did you just touch the keys?" she exclaimed, her voice rising with indignation. "Do you have any idea how expensive this instrument is? Those hands clean toilets." The hall fell silent as other students turned to watch the confrontation. Mr. Jenkins stepped back, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I apologize, Miss Winters. It was an accident," he said quietly, his eyes downcast. Charlotte's friends snickered behind her, emboldening her further. "Maybe you should stick to what you know, mops and trash cans, and leave the fine instruments to people who actually know how to use them." The cruel words hung in the air as Mr. Jenkins stood frozen, his hands now firmly at his sides. Few students looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up in his defense. Professor Harmon, the Academy's revered music director, chose that moment to enter the hall. In her 60s, with a severe bun and piercing eyes, she commanded instant respect. "What's going on here?" she asked, her gaze moving between Charlotte and Mr. Jenkins. Charlotte immediately put on her most respectful expression. "Professor Harmon, I was just about to practice when the janitor touched the piano keys with his dirty hands. I was explaining that he needs to be more careful around valuable instruments." Professor Harmon's expression remained neutral as she turned to Mr. Jenkins. "Robert, is everything all right?" To everyone's surprise, Mr. Jenkins straightened his posture and spoke with quiet dignity. "Yes, Professor. Just a misunderstanding. If Miss Winters would like to practice, I'll come back later." As he turned to leave, Professor Harmon called, "Out." "Actually, Robert, before you go, didn't you mention once that you used to play?" A hush fell over the room. Charlotte and her friends exchanged confused glances. Mr. Jenkins hesitated, looking uncomfortable with the sudden attention. That was a very long time ago, Professor. Another life. Professor Harmon's eyes twinkled with something mysterious. Humor me, Robert. Perhaps you could show these students that music belongs to everyone, not just those privileged enough to afford lessons. Charlotte couldn't contain her disbelief. You're not seriously asking the janitor to play the Steinway? That's absurd. Professor Harmon fixed Charlotte with a stern gaze that immediately silenced her. Music is about respect, Miss Winters. For the instrument, for the composer, and for each other. I think we could all use a reminder of that today. With gentle encouragement from Professor Harmon, Mr. Jenkins reluctantly approached the piano. The students watched, with expressions ranging from amusement to second-hand embarrassment, expecting little more than random plunking of keys. Mr. Jenkins sat down slowly, his work-worn hands hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then his fingers descended onto the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the hall, not tentative or amateur, but powerful, precise, and filled with emotion. The students' smirks froze on their faces, transforming into expressions of shock as the janitor's hands moved across the keyboard with the confidence and artistry of a concert pianist. Charlotte stood motionless, her mouth slightly open as she watched Mr. Jenkins play one of the most technically challenging pieces in piano literature with masterful skill. The music swelled and receded, each phrase telling a story of profound loss and beautiful resilience. As the piece progressed, Mr. Jenkins seemed to forget his audience entirely. He swayed slightly with the music, his face transformed by the emotional journey of the composition. The students and even Professor Harmon stood transfixed, many with tears forming in their eyes as the beautiful melody resonated throughout the hall. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence before the hall erupted. In spontaneous applause, students who had been snickering minutes earlier were now giving a standing ovation, their faces alight with genuine admiration. Professor Harmon stepped forward as Mr. Jenkins rose from the piano bench, looking somewhat embarrassed by the attention. Robert Jenkins graduated from the Moscow Conservatory and was once a concert pianist who toured Europe, she explained to the astonished students. Life circumstances brought him here, but his talent never diminished. Charlotte stepped forward, hesitantly, her earlier arrogance replaced by humility. That was incredible, Mr. Jenkins. I've been working on that same piece for months, and I've never played it like that. Mr. Jenkins smiled kindly at her. Music isn't about who you are or where you come from, Miss Winters. It's about what you feel and how you connect with the piece. Technical skill can be learned, but playing with your heart, that's the true gift. Charlotte nodded, genuine tears forming in her eyes. Would you consider helping me prepare for my Juilliard audition? I think I've been approaching it all wrong. Professor Harmon placed a hand on Mr. Jenkins's shoulder. Robert has agreed to join our faculty starting next semester as our new master class instructor. Those who qualify will have the privilege of learning from him. The news spread through the hall like wildfire, students whispering excitedly among themselves. Charlotte stood quietly, processing the lesson she had just received, one far more valuable than any musical technique. In the months that followed, Mr. Jenkins's story became legendary at Westridge Academy. The hallways that had once witnessed his quiet, invisible presence now buzzed with whispers whenever he passed by. Students who had previously looked through him as if he were merely part of the furniture now greeted him with reverent nods and respectful good mornings. His transformation from the unassuming janitor to the academy's most coveted instructor became the stuff of school lore, passed down from senior students to wide-eyed freshmen during orientation. Professor Harmon had unveiled Mr. Jenkins's true identity during a special assembly the week after the incident. She explained how Robert Jenkins had graduated with highest honors from the Moscow Conservatory 3 decades ago, having studied under some of the greatest pianists of the late 20th century. His debut at Carnegie Hall had received a standing ovation, and critics had hailed him as the most promising new talent of his generation, predicting a career that would rival the greats. But life, as it often does, had other plans. During a European tour, Robert had received news that his wife had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Without hesitation, he had abandoned his burgeoning career and returned home to care for her and their young daughter, Elena. The medical bills had quickly depleted their savings, forcing Robert to take whatever work he could find. After his wife's passing, he had continued working as a custodian to provide for Elena's education, his dreams of musical greatness set aside for the greater love of his family. The Academy's administration, somewhat embarrassed that they had employed a musical genius as a janitor for 15 years without recognition, quickly offered him a position on the faculty. A small office next to the practice rooms was renovated and adorned with a plaque reading Robert Jenkins, Master Pianist and Instructor. The room, once a storage closet, was transformed with acoustic panels, framed musical scores, and a small but exquisite upright piano for demonstrations. Charlotte's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The humbling experience had cracked open something in her that had been calcifying for years, a genuine vulnerability and hunger for authentic connection. She approached Mr. Jenkins the day after his performance, not with the artificial humility of someone merely seeking to save face, but with tears in her eyes and genuine remorse evident in her trembling voice. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she had said, standing awkwardly in the doorway of the maintenance room where he was still organizing his belongings before the move to his new office. "But I wanted you to know that I'm truly sorry, not just because you turned out to be, well, amazing, but because no one deserves to be treated the way I treated you." Mr. Jenkins had studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Apology accepted, Miss Winters. But if you really want to make amends, there's something more valuable than words." "Anything," Charlotte had responded immediately. "Show me that you understand what music really is. Not a trophy to be won or a competition to dominate, but a language of the soul." His eyes had grown distant for a moment. "When I was your age, I played to impress my teachers, to win competitions, to prove I was better than the other students. It wasn't until I played for my wife during her final days that I understood the true purpose of the gift I'd been given." From that day forward, Charlotte became Mr. Jenkins' most dedicated student. She arrived at school an hour early each morning for additional practice sessions and stayed late into the evening, working not just on her technique, but on connecting emotionally with each piece. Her friends were bewildered by the change, and many gradually drifted away, uncomfortable with this new, humbler version of their once imperious leader. Madison confronted her in the cafeteria 2 weeks after the incident, as it had come to be known throughout the school. "What happened to you, Char? You used to be fun. Now all you do is practice and hang out with the janitor-turned-teacher like he's some kind of guru." Charlotte had looked up from her music theory textbook with a calm smile. "I found something real, Maddie, and once you find something real, it's hard to go back to pretending." By the time winter melted into spring, Charlotte had become almost unrecognizable to those who had known her before. The designer accessories remained in her closet, replaced by practical, comfortable clothing that allowed her to focus on her music rather than her appearance. Her once meticulously styled hair was often pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face, free of makeup, revealed freckles that had previously been concealed beneath layers of foundation. But the most profound change was invisible to the eye. It resided in the way she now approached the piano, not as a conquest to be dominated, but as a partner in artistic expression. Mr. Jenkins had taught her to listen, really listen, not just to the notes she played, but to the silence between them, to the resonance that lingered after a chord, to the subtle variations in tone that could transform a technically perfect performance into a transcendent one. During one particularly meaningful lesson in early April, Mr. Jenkins had shared a story that changed Charlotte's perspective entirely. "When I was touring in Vienna," he explained, "I met an old piano tuner who had worked with some of the greatest pianists of the 20th century. He told me something I've never forgotten. The notes are just the beginning. Music happens in the space between the pianist's intention and the listener's heart." As spring blossomed around the Westridge campus, Charlotte bloomed as well, her playing infused with a depth of feeling that had been absent before. She worked tirelessly on her Juilliard audition piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a composition of tremendous technical difficulty and emotional range. Mr. Jenkins guided her through each passage, sometimes demonstrating with his own still masterful playing, sometimes simply closing his eyes and describing the imagery the music evoked. "This section here," he would say, pointing to a particularly complex passage, "this isn't about showing off your technique. Rachmaninoff wrote this after emerging from a deep depression. These arpeggios should feel like someone climbing out of darkness, reaching for light, one painful step at a time." Meanwhile, Mr. Jenkins's influence extended far beyond Charlotte. His master classes, initially offered as an experimental program, quickly became the most sought-after opportunity at Westridge. Students who had previously viewed music as merely another accomplishment to list on college applications began approaching their instruments with newfound reverence. Practice rooms that had once emptied promptly at the end of required hours now needed to be reserved days in advance as students voluntarily extended their practice time. Professor Harmon observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, she found Mr. Jenkins in the faculty lounge grading theory papers. "You've transformed this place, Robert," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I've been teaching here for 25 years, and I've never seen students this inspired." Mr. Jenkins looked up with a modest smile. They were always capable of this dedication. They just needed permission to connect with the music authentically, without fear of judgment or failure. "And Charlotte Winters," Professor Harmon continued, shaking her head in amazement. "If you had told me 6 months ago that she would become our most humble, hard-working student, I would have questioned your sanity." "Charlotte had the furthest to fall," Mr. Jenkins replied thoughtfully. "But sometimes those who start from the greatest height of pride have the capacity for the deepest humility. Her talent was never in question, only what she intended to do with it." The spring recital, traditionally an opportunity for students to showcase their progress before summer break, took on special significance that year. The program had been carefully curated to tell a story of musical evolution, beginning with simple Baroque pieces performed by first-year students and culminating in Charlotte's performance of Rachmaninoff as the grand finale. The evening of the recital, the grand hall was filled beyond capacity. Word had spread throughout the community about the janitor-turned-maestro and his star pupil's remarkable transformation. Parents, alumni, and even several representatives from prestigious conservatories filled the seats, with additional chairs hastily arranged along the walls to accommodate the overflow. Charlotte waited backstage, breathing deeply to calm her racing heart. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, allowing the music to be the focus rather than her appearance. Through the curtain, she could see her parents in the front row, her father for once not distracted by his phone, her mother's usual critical expression replaced by one of curious anticipation. Mr. Jenkins approached, now distinguished in a tailored suit that had been a gift from the faculty. "Nervous?" he asked gently. Charlotte nodded. "But not like before. It's different now." "How so?" he inquired, though his knowing smile suggested he already understood. "Before, I was terrified of making a mistake," of being judged, of not being good enough, she explained, her voice steady despite her nerves. Now I'm just concerned that I won't do justice to the music, that I won't convey what Rachmaninoff intended, what I feel when I play it. Mr. Jenkins placed a hand on her shoulder. That's the right kind of fear. Use it. Let it remind you what matters. When Charlotte's name was announced, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. The grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, the same instrument that had been the scene of her humiliation months before. Before sitting down, she stepped to the microphone that had been set up at the front of the stage. "Before I play tonight," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I want to share something important. Music has taught me that appearances can be deceiving, and that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places." Her eyes found Mr. Jenkins in the wings, and she smiled. "This performance is dedicated to Mr. Jenkins, who taught me that the true purpose of music isn't to impress others, but to express what lives in your heart." As Charlotte took her place at the piano, a hush fell over the audience. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, finding that quiet space within where music began. Then her fingers descended onto the keys, and the powerful opening chords of Rachmaninoff's concerto filled the hall. What the audience witnessed that evening was more than a technically proficient performance. They experienced the musical embodiment of Charlotte's journey, from arrogance to humility, from emptiness to fulfillment. Each phrase told a story of transformation. Each dynamic shift revealed a new emotional landscape. When she reached the triumphant final movement, many in the audience were openly weeping, moved not just by the beauty of the composition, but by the authentic emotion with which it was delivered. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Charlotte stood by the piano, tears streaming down her face, no longer concerned with maintaining her composure or projecting an image of perfection. When Mr. Jenkins joined her on stage, she embraced him without hesitation, whispering, "Thank you," as the applause continued to thunder around them. 2 weeks later, Charlotte received her acceptance letter from Juilliard, accompanied by a personal note from the director of admissions citing her audition as one of the most emotionally compelling performances we've witnessed from an applicant in recent memory. She shared the news with Mr. Jenkins first before even telling her parents. "Congratulations," he said, genuine pride warming his voice. "You've earned this through hard work and true growth." Charlotte nodded, looking down at the prestigious letterhead. "It's strange. Getting into Juilliard was everything to me before. Now it feels important, but not defining. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Mr. Jenkins replied. "Because you've discovered something more valuable than any acceptance letter. You found your voice." The following fall, before Charlotte left for New York, the Board of Trustees at Westridge Academy announced a new initiative, the Robert Jenkins Scholarship for Musical Excellence, designed to provide full tuition to talented students from underprivileged backgrounds. The first recipient was a brilliant young pianist from Charlotte's former middle school, a girl who had been cleaning houses with her mother to save for music lessons. At the scholarship announcement ceremony, Charlotte performed a duet with Mr. Jenkins, their 4 hands moving in perfect synchronicity across the keys. The piece they chose, Schubert's Fantasy in F minor, was symbolic in its structure, beginning with 2 distinct voices that gradually intertwined to become something greater than either could achieve alone. As Charlotte packed for Juilliard, she carefully placed a framed photograph on top of her clothes, a picture taken after the spring recital showing her and Mr. Jenkins at the piano, both smiling with the unguarded joy of those who have found their authentic purpose. The piano that had once been a symbol of exclusivity and status had become a bridge between worlds, proving that music truly belongs to everyone brave enough to express their soul through it. In years to come, whenever Charlotte performed on the world's greatest stages, She would think back to that pivotal moment, when a humble janitor had touched the keys of a piano, and in doing so had struck a chord that would resonate through her life forever.